Today's daf, Be'ezras Hashem, is Masechta Zevachim Daf Tzadik Ches, the end of the 11th parak, the last daf in the 11th parak, and we're going to start from Daf Tzadik Zayin Amud Beis. We're starting by Ashkechon Chatas. Ashkechon Chatas. So basically, what we're discussing over here is an easy concept, which it appears all over Torah, where if something is noisein tam, let's say you have a drop of milk that fell into a pot of meat. So if the milk gives taste into the pot of meat, so then the meat is aser because it's basar b'chalav. And really, the shear is 1/60th, as you may be familiar with, a 60th. But the thing is that this thing really, which you would try to say that it's only it's batal b'raiv, right? That's what you would normally say. But we don't say it's batal b'raiv because midrabanan, what do we say? Midrabanan, it's not batal. It's if it's you can feel the taste, it is not nullified. This only is midrabanan by other isurim in the Torah. But in the Chumash, it says, and I'm reading the pasuk right on the screen here, koil, it talks about a korban chatas, and it says, koil asher yiga b'vsara, any piece of meat that touches the meat of the chatas and absorb the taste of the chatas, yigdosh is as holy as the chatas. So imagine a regular piece of meat that touched the chatas, so it absorbed some of the juices of and the taste of the chatas meat, and obviously it's a different type of meat, so that you can taste it. It's a different type of meat that went into the chulin meat. So then the chulin meat has a din like chatas meat, and therefore that chulin meat has to be eaten by male kohanim in the Beis Hamikdash, and only for a day and night, and that's it. So that's what the Torah tell you, that by chatos we say tam ki ikar, tam anoisin tam, if it gives taste, it's aser, or it has the holiness. So that is by the korban chatos. So now the Gemara says, this chumash, askechan, you see it's about like 10 lines from the bottom of the page here. Ashkechan, we find chatos the miskadesh bibalua. We find the korban chatos that if it swallows, if it absorbs, if the other meat absorbs some of the juices of the korban chatas, it has a din like a korban chatas. Shar kachim and how do you know this concept applies by every other kachim? Let's say by a korban shlamim that goes into the juices of a korban shlamim goes into a chulin piece of meat. How do you know that chulin piece of meat has a din like shlamim? Amar Shmuel mishum Rab Laza. What? Amar Shmuel mishum Rab Laza. Zois atayra la'oila v'la mincha v'la chatas v'la oshem v'la miluim.
Baruch, Stephen is waiting to get in.
Oh, Stephen's waiting to get in. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Oh, so there we go. Yeah. Hi, Stephen. I'm sorry. Yes.
No problem.
I overlooked it. Okay.
No problem.
Okay. So we're discussing over here about the concept that if the taste of a piece of meat of chatas goes into a piece of chulin meat, then the chulin meat has a din like a korban chatas, right? And so the Gemara says that pasuk was only written by the korban chatas. As I'll bring up the pasuk again. It says koil ash yiga b'vsara yigdash. If you touch the chatas meat, any piece of meat that touches the chatas meat is holy as the korban chatas meat. So now the Gemara says, how do you know that this applies only by korban chatas? How do you know that it does? It also applies by shlamim meat. That if a shlamim meat touches chulin meat, that chulin meat becomes like shlamim meat. Amar Shmuel mishum Rab Laza, because there's a pasuk says zois taras la'oila v'la mincha v'la chatas v'la oshem v'la milum l'zevach hashlamim. So the Torah tells you that these are the laws of the karbanos oila mincha chatas oshem miluim and zevach shlamim. Miluim was the karbanos that Moshe Rabbeinu brought when they inaugurated the Mishkan. But the Torah doesn't have to tell you, repeat it, these are the laws of the oila, these are the laws of the mincha, because the Torah does tell you says it separately. This is the law of the oila. There's another pasuk says this is the law of the chatas, right? I think this is the pasuk says zois taras chatas. So why does it repeat it? So every carbon learns something from another carbon. So every carbon learns something from the oila. Ki oila. Every carbon has a din like an oila. Ma oila tu unekeli, af coil tu unekeli. We learned that just like an oila needs a vessel, so also an instrument, let's say. So every carbon needs an instrument. My kli, what kind of instrument does every carbon need? Ilem and mizrak, do you need all the carbonos need to catch the blood, you need a instrument, you need a vessel to catch the blood. So that's why oila, the Torah doesn't tell you that by other carbonos. How do you know? The Torah tells you by a shlamim, a shalmei tzibur, which was shlamim brought by the entire group, that Moshe used a vessel to catch the blood. And we're going to know that every carbon is like a shlamim, that it needs a vessel to catch the blood. So why do I need a pasuk to teach you that every carbon is like an oila? What do you learn from the fact that the Torah said that every carbon is like an oila? Ella says the Gemara, the sakin. From here we learn that in to shech a carbon, you need to use actually a knife. Really, to shecht a animal, you probably can use a sharp reed, a sharp blade of a leaf or something, if you're able to do that. But you don't necessarily need a knife. By carbonos, the shechita has to be done with a knife. And how do you know that? The oila gufa minolan, and you learn that from oila. But how do you know by a carbon oila you needed a knife? Because the pasuk says, "Vayishlach Avraham es yodoi vayikach es hama acheles." Avraham stretched out his hand and he took the knife. Ma'acheles is the knife. V'hasam oilahu, and there, when he was trying to bring the Yitzchak as the Akeda, and the ayil that he brought instead of Yitzchak, it's actually he was bringing oilers. From this, so he brought Yitzchak as an oiler, and he brought the ayil as an oiler. So we see that the carbon oiler needs a knife. So from here we know that every carbon, when you shecht it, you need a knife. You can't use a sharp reed. Mincha, what does every carbon learn from the word mincha? So ma mincha nechelas kahuna, just like a mincha. The only ones that can eat the mincha is a male kohen. Af koil, all these other carbonos that of the tzibor and chatas, einin necholin el zichre kahuna, can only be eaten by the male kohens, not the regular shlamims, but the shalmei tzibor needs, and chatas and osham all need are only eaten by male kohens. Says the Gemara, Mahi, what do I learn from that? I chatas for osham, to teach you that a chatas and osham have to be eaten by a male kohen. The hedik sibhu. There's psukim that describe by chatas and osham that they're supposed to be eaten by a male kohen, because by an osham it says kol zocha b'kahanim yochalenu. Any male kohens are supposed to eat the carbon osham, and we saw in the psukim. Where's the pasuk? There's a pasuk says over here, right over here. Kol zocha b'kahanim yochal oisa. By a chatas it says that. So I know by chatas and asham that only male kohens are supposed to eat it, and how do you know the shalmei tzibur if it's teaching you a shalmei tzibur beriba dekra asi? I know that from an extra pasuk. It says in Parshas Korach b'kodesh hakadoshim techelenu kol zocha yochel oisa limit al shalmei tzibur she'einin nechon ela l'zichri kahuna. There's an extra pasuk yochel oisa that we say it probably could refer to a shalmei tzibur, and it teaches you a shlamim brought by the group, by the congregation, is only eaten by male kohens. So what do I need this limud to a mincha? That just like a mincha is by a male kohen, everything is by a male kohen. Answers the Gemara Tanoi. It's actually a Tanoi. Really, it's teaching me a shalmei tzibur is eaten by a male kohen. But we go to Amid Aleph. Ika demasna lafken mahocha Some learn it from the pasuk in Parshas Kairach, and some learn it from the pasuk that you juxtaposes Shalmei Tzibur to a mincha. That just like a mincha is eaten by male kohanim, so also the shlomim of the tzibur, the shlomim of the tzibur is eaten by a male kohen. And here is the reason why we brought this whole brisa in. Chatas. Why is all karbonos compared to a chatas? So that's the point. And this is the whole point of our discussion. Ma chatas miskadeshes v'luah. Just like chatas, if it touches chulin, the chulin becomes holy if it absorbs the juices of the chatas. Af koil, so by every carbon, if chulin touches any carbon, miskadeshes b'luah, it gets whole. It just catches the kedusha by absorbing the juices of the shlomim or the asham or whatever it is. Again, this concept of just absorbing the juices and not becoming bottled because you can still taste it, it applies by karbonos. It's a deraisa by karbonos. Now the Gemara continues the brisa. Asham. What do we juxtapose that every carbon is like a asham? So ma asham ein shape v'shilya kadosh boy. An asham is a male carbon, and therefore the sac and the placenta. Let's say that there's no such a thing of a sac and a placenta because it's a male. So there's no kedusha by the sac and the placenta. Af koil. So any type of female karchim ein shape v'shilya kadosh boy. The placenta and the sac are not holy. In other words, if you shecht a carbon and it turns out that it was pregnant, right? Let's say a chatas, and it turns out it was pregnant. We know you bring the fats and the kidneys of that carbon of the mother onto the mizbeach, but maybe you should also bring the kidneys and the fats of the embryo on the mizbeach. So the answer is it's not holy, because you learn from a carbon asham, just like a carbon asham can never be an embryo because it's male. So even carbonos like a chatas, which could have an embryo, that embryo's innards are not brought on the mizbeach. So when does the vlad kochim become holy? You can't say it never becomes holy. Kusava, we hold vladas kochim, the offspring of a kodesh, of a chatas, let's say, b'haviyosim, when it's born, hein kedoshim, then holy. But not when it was in the mother's stomach. So if it was shechted before it was born, that embryo is not holy. V'donin, we also see efsha mishi efsha. We learn something that's possible from something that's impossible. Chatas, it's possible to have an embryo. And asham, it's not possible to have an embryo. And yet we can learn the concept that that we can learn the chatas from asham, even though one could argue and say, what is asham teaching me something about a chatas? By asham, it's impossible for it to have an embryo. But this is a concept you can learn something that's possible from something that's impossible. Then we learned in the brisa miluin. The Torah compared every carbon like the carbons of inauguration. So we darshan ma miluim moisreseim besreifa ve'ein balachayim b'moisrehen. Just like the carbon by the inauguration of the Mishkan, which was like 7 days, right? Only the when they shechted an animal at that time, what was left over you had to burn, right? If you didn't eat it in time, the carbon in time, you had to burn it. But ve'ein balachayim b'moisrehen. Had there been extra carbonos, live carbonos that they did not bring, they don't become noiser. I've called by every carbon. In the actual carbon, let's say I commit to bring one shlomim, but I made 2 carbons holy, and saying like this, that whichever one I'm going to bring, I don't know which is going to be my shlomim. So then the other one is not the shlomim. So when I bring one of them, right, the one that remains alive doesn't become noiser. Only the meat of the dead animal that you shechted for the carbon becomes noiser, and the balachayim don't become noiser. Av kol ma'ishusayim b'sreim be'ein balachayim shusreim. There's no such a thing of having a live animal have a din noiser on it. And that happens often. That sometimes either you commit to bring, you set aside 2 animals for that one commitment that you made, or you set aside one animal and that got lost. then you set aside another animal to replace the animal that was lost, then you found the original animal. Anyway, when you don't shech that animal, there's no din noiser on that. And then shlomim. What do we learn from the word shlomim? Ma shlomim mefalgim mispalgin, avkol mefalgim mispalgin. Just like shlomim, you can make the meat piggle by having the wrong thought. Also, it could also make the nesachim, the wine and the libations that you pour on the mizbeach that go along with the carbon, also piggle. Avkoil, so also every carbon, mifaglim, you can make the carbon piggle, the meat piggle, umispalgin, and the oil, the wine and the flour, that's the sachim that go along with the carbon could also become piggle. So that was the one brisa that learned all this pasuk, zois toiras ha'oila lachatas v'la'oshab v'la'miluim. The Torah tells you all these carbonas are, you learn something from every carbon. Every carbon learns something from another carbon. But Masnith Tamim Shmeid Rabbi Kiva, in the Brisa, was taught in the name of Rabbi Kiva, Mincha. What do you learn from Mincha? Ma Mincha miskadeshes bebelua, avkoil miskadeshes bebelua. Just like a carbon Mincha. If you have two, let's say, flatbreads of Mincha, and they touch each other and they're hot, and one absorbed from the other. One was a mincha, one was a plain bread. So the plain bread absorbed the kedusha of the mincha. And that Torah says that kol, after it touches the mincha, anything touching the mincha becomes holy. Av kol miskadeshes bebelua. So now the question is, it taught you that same idea by chatas, meat, touching chulin meat. And it teaches you the idea by mincha, flatbread, touching non-mincha flatbread, so chulin flatbread. Why do you have to tell me this idea, the same idea, that the one that absorbed has a din like the chatas or the mincha? V'yitzrach l'michtav l'mincha, v'yitzrach l'michtav chatas. It had to say this idea by the mincha, and it had to say this idea by the chatas. Diyashmina mincha. If it just say by the mincha, the idea the rekiva mivla, because the mincha is somehow made of flour, it absorbs. So there the Torah tells you absorption makes the plain bread holy. Avachatas, maybe by two pieces of meat, a maloi. I would say that it doesn't work. The imash meaning chatas would say by chatas this concept, mishim dekorer, because when it works, it goes very deep into the chatas. Ava mincha, because it goes all the way, somehow when the meat cools off, it absorbs everything much more deeper inside. Ava incha emaloi, mincha, it remains mostly on the surface. I would think that it doesn't, blias don't work by a mincha. Tzricha, that's what we need it for. And what do we learn from chatas? Chatas is ma chatas ein a boa element of chulim. We learn all carbonis. If you owe a carbon, you have to use your regular bank account to pay for the carbon. You can't use your Maisa Sheni money. How do you have Maisa Sheni money? You mafresh Maisa Sheni of fruits, and then you redeemed it onto money. So it has to come from your personal pocket. So ma'achatas ain't a boilam in a chulin. It has to come from chulin money. Ubayom, you can only bring a chatas during the daytime. Uviyadei hayamanas, you have to do the service with your right hand. Avkol, so every carbon ain't a boa element of chulin. You have to only pay for it from your chulin money. The shlamim that you promised to bring, or the taida have to bring from your chulin money, not Maisa Sheni. Ubayom, and it has to be brought during the day. Uviyadei hayamanas has to be brought with your right hand. Says the Gemara of a chatas menolan. How do you know a chatas has to be brought from your personal money? Maybe a chatas can be brought from your Maisa Sheni money. Omar Chizda, Omar Kra, the pasuk says, "V'hikra Aharon es parachatas ashaloi." Aaron had to pay for the chatas ashaloi that belonged to him. Mishaloi, he was paid for it from his own funds. V'loi shemishel tzibor, he can't use communal funds for paying for the carbon chatas. V'loi shel ma'aser, he couldn't use Maisa Sheni money. So now we know chatas cannot be brought from Maisa Sheni money. So also every carbon cannot be brought from Maisa Sheni money. We also learn from a chatas by yoim that you bring a chatas by daytime. Says the Gemara, but every carbon we know you're supposed to bring it during the daytime because the Torah says b'yoim tzavoisai. on the day that he commanded, we darshan that every carbon needs to be brought by the day, during the daytime. And says the Gemara, you don't bring carbonos at night. And says the Gemara, kiti naspa. Okay, that's just extra. We put that through that in, but the truth is, you don't need chatas to teach you that idea about every carbon. Says the Gemara, biyodei hayamonis, that it has to be done. The services have to be done with the right hand. Wait a second. Why do I need chatas to teach me that? Mid the Rabba Babachana nafka. We learned it from Rabba Babachana. The Amar Rabba Babachana Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish said, "Kol mokom in any parsha regarding carbonis shenamaba, where the Torah either writes the word etzba or it writes the word koyin." Let's say the Torah talks about shlomim and it writes the word koyin. So eine el yamin, it means that the koyin has to use his right hand. So every carbon really says the word koyin. So therefore, I know that it has to be done with the right hand. So I don't need to juxtapose every carbon techatas to teach me this concept that it has to be done with the right hand. The fact that it says the word koyin, now I know it has to be done with the right hand. And says the Gemara, kedi nasva. That's extra. We didn't need that. We didn't need that to teach me. We didn't need chatas to teach me that all carbonos need to be done by the right hand. The Iba Yisema, if you want, I can tell you, Savalak Rab Shimon, that this brisa holds like Rab Shimon, the Omar, who said, Etzba loik bayakuna. If it says the word finger, then even if it didn't say the word koyin, I know it has to be done with the right hand. Finger, just the word finger in the Chumash, whatever concept it's talking about, it means right hand. But kahuna, if it just says koyin, boy etzba, it had to say right hand, right finger, in order to mean right hand. So therefore, by every carbon, it says the word koyin, but it doesn't say the word etzba. So by every carbon, I would not know that it needs the right hand. So that's why I needed to learn it from chatas. Asham, what does Asham teach you? What does every carbon learn from Asham? Ma Asham atzmoisav mitarm, just like Asham. You eat the meat, the kohen eats the meat, but the bones, he can make, do whatever he wants with the bones. He can make a baseball bat with it. Af koil atzmoisa matur. So every carbon, the meat is what's holy, but the bones are permitted. You use the bones for whatever you want. Now let's finish up the parak. Amarava, new concept. Again, we learned that if dam chatas falls on the clothing, if the blood of a chatas falls on the clothing, the Torah tells you have to launder the chatas in the Beis Hamikdash. So, pshitali, Rava said, we go to Amid Beis, pshitali, it's very simple to me. Dam chatas lamata, if the blood of the chatas fell onto the clothing first, the dam oila lamala, and the dam oila fell on top. Now, dam oila, the blood of an oila, does not have to be washed. It's only the blood of the chatas that fell on clothing that have to be washed. But since the chatas blood fell first, and then the dam oil fell second, ton kibbus, this item of clothing needs to be washed with the halachas of the Beis Hamikdash, in the Beis Hamikdash. Boy Rava, so Rava asked the question, what happens if you have the reverse? Dam oil lamata, the blood of the oil fell first onto the beged. So now the beged is and it dried up. So now the beged has dry blood oil in there. So you're gonna v'dam chatas lamala, and then blood of the chatas fell on top of it. The blood of the chatas is touching the beged, but it'll never be absorbed into the beged. So does it need kibus or not? Mahu, what's the din? Mishum negehu, is it the Torah says you have to wash the beged, the clothing that touched dam chatas, because it touches dam chatas. V'onageya. In this case, the dam chatas is touching the beged, and therefore you need to wash the clothing. You're telling me that the reason why the Torah wants you to wash the clothing is because the blood not only touches the beged, but gets swallowed into the beged. But in this case, since what was swallowed into the beged first was dam oila, loibol, never swallowed it's never going to swallow the dam chatas. So Rava then concluded, no, it doesn't have to be washed. If the dam oila fell first and then the dam chatas fell, you don't have to wash the beged. You have to scrape off the blood, but you don't have to wash the beged. Concludes the Gemara. Omar Rava. Rava said, Pshitali dam al bigdai. Let's say you have a beged, nothing to do with kachim. You have blood. You want it in the ancient times. You need to wear tahar clothing. So let's say, in order to matara clothing, you dump it into mikvah. But let's say there was blood on the clothing, so then it's a chatzitza. Dam al bigda, if you have blood on your clothing, chaitzitz, it's a chatzitza. You have to take off the blood first, and then you could toivel and matar the piece of clothing. Vim tabachu, but if you are a butcher, ain't a chaitzitz, it's not a chatzitza, because butcher's clothing have blood on it, so it's not a chatzitza because it's a normal thing to have. Revav al bigdai, if he has a schmaltz stain, let's say a wax stain on his clothing, chaitzitz, that would be a chatzitza even for a butcher, because a butcher is not selling wax. Then moicha ravav, but if he sells oil and wax, who ain't a chaitzitz, it will not be chaitzitz. So it depends what you sell. If that's normal to be on your clothing, then it's not a chatzitza. So Boyev Rav asked the question, Dam Ruvav al Bigday. If a person has blood and wax and oil on his clothing, so he has two stains on his clothing, Maho, what's the din? Is it a chatzitza and therefore you can't toivel this beged or not? Im tabach, so what's the question? Im tabachu, if he's a butcher, tepik le mishum ravav, then he shouldn't be allowed to be toivel the beged because he has an oil stain on the beged. The imoicha ravavhu, if he's someone who sells oil and wax, but then on the other hand, tepik le mishum dam, there's a blood stain on the beged. So what's Rava's question? Certainly this beged is a chatzitza and you cannot toivel. Answers the Gemara like tzicha, the ovid havaha. This man does both. He's a butcher and he also sells wax. He also sells candles and oil. So, and he has a stain of each on this piece of clothing, a blood stain and an oil stain. Achada loikapot. So maybe one stain of one type of blood, maybe he wouldn't be concerned. Atarta, but now you have two different stains. Kapit, he would be makbid, and if he's makbid, if he's concerned about that, then it's a chatzitza. Oidilmo, maybe atarti nami lekapit. Since he deals in both items, he's a butcher, plus he sells oil and wax. So even if there's two different stains on his clothing, he doesn't concern himself about that, and therefore it's not a chatzitza. You could be toivel the beged. Teku, the Gemara remains by a question. So the Gemara answers, Hadron Allah, Da'amachatas, Baruch Hashem, we finished the 11th parak of Masechta Zevachim.